My presentation is on biogeochemical cycles for lakes and ponds, and my name is Daniel Brady. There are two basic types of biogeochemical cycles, gaseous and sedimentary. The main pools of nutrients for gaseous cycles are the atmosphere and the oceans. These are available to lakes and ponds through various processes such as nitrogen fixation and photosynthesis. The main pools in sedimentary cycles are in the soil, rocks, and minerals. Available forms occur as salts dissolved in lakes and ponds through precipitation and runoff. The carbon cycle. The amount of organic and inorganic carbon delivered to a given lake or pond depends on land use cover in the catchment and upstream surface, groundwater hydrology, climate, and geomorphology. Some inputs include biological processes such as photosynthesis and air-water gas exchange, weathering such as precipitation and runoff. Some outputs are respiration, sedimentation, methane evasion, and outflows such as tributary or groundwater. Some cycling mechanisms are calcification, decomposition, and photosynthesis through algae. This is a diagram on the carbon cycle and the major carbon fluxes in lakes and reservoirs. Air-water gas exchange, surface water inflow plus atmospheric carbon inputs, groundwater seepage, photosynthetic uptake of dissolved inorganic carbon, respiration, settling of particulate organic carbon, sediment carbon burial, methane evasion, calcification, biotic and abiotic, tributary outflows, and groundwater outflows. The oxygen cycle. Plant photosynthesis produces oxygen within the region below the water surface with adequate light. This is called the photic zone. Microbial, respiratory, and organic decay processes consume oxygen. To the right, you can see a diagram that shows the relationship between oxygen and carbon dioxide through the processes of photosynthesis and respiration. This is a diagram that shows the percent saturation of dissolved oxygen goes down remarkably through the depth of the lake. And as you can see, the upper zone, the photic zone, is supersaturated with oxygen, where the lower zone is anoxic. The sulfur cycle is the collection of processes by which sulfur moves to and from minerals, including water bodies and living systems. To the right, you can see a diagram of the sulfur cycle in lakes, and see the different processes in the water, the sediment, and further down in the oxic and anoxic conditions. Nutrient cycling. When nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus flow into the lake, leading to excessive plant and algae growth, they die, they sink to the bottom. When they decompose, they release nutrients back into the water. That fuels new plant and algae growth, and when those die, it repeats the process. The nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is the major component of the Earth's atmosphere. Therefore, it is abundant on Earth, but it must go through various processes to be put into aquatic ecosystems. Some inputs include biological processes such as bacteria and algae, human impacts such as crop or energy production, animal impacts such as waste and decomposition, lightning fixation, and weathering such as precipitation and runoff. Some outputs include denitrification, sedimentation or absorption, and outflows such as tributary or groundwater. A cycling mechanism is nitrification. Here is a diagram of the nitrogen cycle in water bodies, and it shows all of the various inputs and outputs and cycling mechanisms I previously stated. The phosphorus cycle. In the prevailing temperature and pressure ranges, phosphorus occurs in liquid or solid mineral forms. Therefore, it is naturally found in water, rocks, sediments, and soil. Some inputs include decomposition, such as detritus, dead organisms and waste, human impacts through fertilizers, resuspension of sediments through bottom feeders and human alteration, weathering of rocks, precipitation, and runoff. Some outputs include sedimentation, geological uplift, outflows, tributary, or groundwater. Some cycling mechanisms are consumption, the food web, and decomposition through bacteria and fungi. This is a diagram on the phosphorus cycle in water bodies, and it shows the inputs, outputs, and cycling mechanisms that were previously discussed on the last slide. This is a diagram of the phosphorus cycle in water bodies. You can see the inputs of detritus, weathering, and resuspension of sediments, and the cycling mechanisms of consumption and decomposition. I'm going to talk briefly about stratification in lakes because it affects the biogeochemical cycles. During the summer, many lakes stratify. That means the warmer, more buoyant water stays near the surface and does not mix with the cooler, more dense bottom water. The nutrient supply for phytoplankton comes from the water column. During summer, when that supply from the bottom waters is cut off, then cyanobacteria, species that fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, have the advantage over the other phytoplankton groups. The more nutrients there are in the lake, the more phytoplankton can grow. I'm also going to speak briefly about eutrophication, which is an ecological process in which a water body is increasingly enriched with organic matter. The most obvious signs of this in lakes involve algal blooms and fish kills. This is caused primarily by excessive inputs of phosphorus and nitrogen. Accelerated eutrophication can render a water body unusable for many uses, including fishing, swimming, and drinking water. Non-point sources of nutrients such as soil, sediments, and groundwater are extremely difficult to combat, and watershed management is required to successfully control eutrophication, involving comprehensive programs that tackle all the sources of nutrients in the entire watershed. Here's a diagram on eutrophication in lakes. Nitrogen and phosphorus cause an increase in phytoplankton, which results in an algal bloom. When the algae die, they decay, and this results in a loss of food, habitat, and oxygen production for the lake, and it degrades the entire water quality. Thank you for listening to my presentation on the biogeochemical cycles in lakes and ponds. Here is a list of the references that I used in making my presentation. Thank you for your time, and goodbye.